I still find it strange how a routine stop at the neighborhood supermarket on an ordinary Saturday afternoon, undertaken with nothing more dramatic in mind than picking up a handful of household essentials before heading home, somehow transformed into an experience involving flashing police lights, formal questioning, and the unsettling realization that a polite request spoken in a calm tone can be reframed as something far more sinister when filtered through suspicion rather than simple human decency. And the entire chain of events began with something so trivial that, even now, it feels almost absurd to recount in full detail. I had gone to the store after finishing a long morning of errands, already slightly fatigued from navigating crowded parking lots and long lines at the bank, and I remember thinking that this final stop would be the easiest part of my day because I only needed a specific brand of disinfectant spray, a pack of paper towels, and a few grocery staples, none of which seemed likely to generate any complication beyond the usual minor inconvenience of comparing prices or searching for an employee when something was out of stock. Yet as I pushed my cart down the brightly lit aisles with their polished tile floors reflecting the overhead fluorescent panels, I noticed immediately that the store had rearranged certain shelves, placing frequently purchased cleaning products higher than before, perhaps to accommodate new promotional displays on the lower racks. When I reached the cleaning supplies aisle, I quickly spotted the exact disinfectant spray my wife preferred, recognizable by its distinct blue label and subtle citrus scent. That did not trigger her allergies, but unfortunately the bottles had been stocked on the very top shelf and pushed toward the back in such a way that even stretching fully on my toes left my fingers grazing only the edge of the nearest container without sufficient grip to pull it forward safely. And because I have never been fond of risking an avalanche of plastic bottles crashing down around me in an attempt to prove self-sufficiency, I paused to consider my options. A store employee was visible at the far end of the aisle stacking paper towel packages onto a rolling cart, yet he appeared focused on his task and partially obstructed by tall displays. And I calculated that calling out might not only be disruptive, but might also require waiting several minutes for him to navigate around the cluttered floor space, which is why I noticed the woman standing only a few feet away examining laundry detergent, and thought that asking her, politely and briefly, might resolve the matter in seconds without inconvenience to anyone involved. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, dressed in athleisure clothing and holding her phone loosely in one hand, while scanning product labels with the other. And because she was slightly taller than I am and already positioned directly beneath the shelf in question, I stepped no closer than a respectful distance and said in a neutral tone, "Excuse me, would you mind helping me reach that spray on the top shelf?" while pointing clearly at the specific bottle to avoid ambiguity, adding instinctively, "It's just a bit out of my reach," so that she would understand the practical reason behind the request. Her reaction was immediate and unexpectedly sharp, as she turned toward me with raised eyebrows and a look that conveyed not mild inconvenience, but open suspicion. And instead of responding with a simple yes or no, she asked, "Why can't you get it yourself?" in a tone that suggested she believed there must be some ulterior motive behind my question, which caught me off guard enough that I felt compelled to reassure her that I had already attempted to reach it, and simply did not want to risk knocking over the entire row, emphasizing that I understood completely if she preferred not to assist, rather than declining and returning to her shopping. She stepped back slightly as though establishing distance and said that she was not obligated to help strangers, and that it was inappropriate for me to approach her at all, a statement that seemed disproportionate given the mundane nature of the interaction. And I immediately apologized if my request had made her uncomfortable, clarifying that no offense was intended and that I would seek assistance elsewhere, because in that moment my primary goal was not obtaining disinfectant spray, or restoring a sense of normalcy to what had suddenly become an uncomfortable exchange. As I began to turn toward the far end of the aisle, where the employee was still working, she raised her voice just enough to draw attention from a couple browsing nearby, declaring that I had singled her out deliberately and that my behavior was suspicious, which froze me in place because I could not comprehend how a brief, respectful request could be interpreted as targeted harassment. And I responded as calmly as possible that she simply happened to be nearest, and that there had been no intention beyond convenience. Instead of allowing the conversation to dissipate, she escalated further by stating that I was making her feel unsafe, and that she did not appreciate being confronted, even though I had neither stepped into her personal space nor raised my voice. And I could feel the atmosphere in the aisle shift as other shoppers slowed their movements, pretending to examine products while clearly listening to the exchange unfold with growing curiosity. I attempted once more to de-escalate by stepping back visibly, placing one hand lightly on my cart and saying that I was sorry for the misunderstanding and would leave her alone entirely. Yet before I could walk away, she announced loudly that she was calling 911 because she felt threatened, and although part of me assumed this was an exaggeration intended to intimidate me into retreating more quickly, she immediately unlocked her phone and began speaking into it with urgent tones that contrasted sharply with the calm reality of the situation. Hearing her describe me to the dispatcher as a man confronting her aggressively in the aisle, implying persistence where there had been none, produced a surreal sensation that I can only describe as watching an alternate version of events being constructed in real time, and I felt a wave of anxiety not because I believed I had done anything wrong, but because I understood that once emergency services are involved, narratives can overshadow nuance. I deliberately increased the distance between us by several more steps, ensuring that I remained clearly visible and non-threatening, keeping both hands away from my pockets and resisting any urge to defend myself loudly, since I knew that arguing could reinforce her portrayal rather than undermine it, and I focused instead on maintaining composure while waiting for what now seemed inevitable. The store manager arrived first, alerted by another customer who had overheard the word police, and he asked for an explanation from both sides, listening carefully as I recounted the exact words I had spoken and the immediate apology I had offered when she reacted negatively, while she insisted that my approach constituted intimidation despite acknowledging that I had stepped away once she expressed discomfort. Within minutes, two uniformed officers entered the aisle, their presence commanding attention in a space normally reserved for mundane decisions between competing brands of detergent, and they separated us slightly before requesting identification and individual accounts of the interaction, which I provided with deliberate clarity, emphasizing the brevity of the request and the absence of any physical contact or obstruction. The officers asked her whether I had touched her, blocked her movement, followed her, or continued speaking after she declined assistance, and she conceded that I had not, yet maintained that she felt uneasy, prompting one officer to explain calmly that while personal feelings are valid, criminal conduct requires specific behaviors that were not present in the description provided by either party or corroborated by the manager. They consulted briefly with store staff regarding security footage, which confirmed that the interaction lasted less than a minute before I stepped back, and gradually the tension in the aisle gave way to an awkward quiet as it became evident that no actionable offense had occurred, though the emotional residue of accusation lingered uncomfortably in the air. One officer addressed both of us collectively, stating that asking for help reaching an item is not inherently inappropriate, and that individuals are free to decline such requests without escalating the matter, while also reminding her that emergency services are intended for genuine threats rather than misunderstandings. A statement delivered without hostility, but with unmistakable firmness. She appeared dissatisfied, insisting that people should not approach strangers in stores. Yet the officers reiterated that polite, brief communication in public spaces does not constitute harassment, absent additional conduct, and after ensuring that neither party wished to pursue further action, they concluded the encounter and departed, leaving behind the faint echo of their footsteps against the tile floor. The manager retrieved the disinfectant spray for me without comment, beyond a quiet apology for the disruption, and as he handed it over I sensed that he had likely witnessed similar escalations before, perhaps recognizing that modern public spaces sometimes operate under heightened suspicion that transforms ordinary civility into perceived intrusion. I completed my shopping in relative silence, acutely aware of the glances from nearby customers who had witnessed at least part of the ordeal, and as I exited the store into the fading afternoon light, I felt not anger so much as contemplation about how easily assumptions can distort simple interactions into confrontations requiring official intervention. Although the incident resolved without legal consequence, it underscored for me the fragility of social trust in shared environments and the importance of measured response, even when faced with disproportionate reaction, because while I cannot control how others interpret my actions, I can control the steadiness of my own conduct. And in that sense, the most significant outcome of the entire episode was not the police report that never materialized, but the renewed awareness that civility, though sometimes misunderstood, remains worth practicing regardless of how dramatically it may be mischaracterized in the moment.